In the quiet hills of South Dakota, a young man named Evan Reed discovered a cave that was never meant to be opened. What he found inside a murdered marshal's badge and the truth behind a town's corruption would change everything. Stay with us to uncover the story buried beneath Willow Creek. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more American tales of courage and justice. The late summer sun bled gold across the plains of Willow Creek, a small town that hadn't changed much since the first rail line passed through 20 years ago. Dust clung to the windows of every shop, and the street smelled faintly of horse's iron and sweat. 18-year-old Evan Reed had grown up in that dust, quiet, stubborn. The kind of boy who kept his head down but his eyes open. He was the son of a miner who'd never come back from the old ridge west of town. Folks said a cave-in swallowed him whole. Others whispered there was more to it. Evan never asked which was true. He simply carried the silence like an inheritance. That afternoon, the sun hung low and mean burning against the rim of the hills. Evan wiped his forehead with his sleeve as he guided an old mule down a narrow path toward the ridge. He had been exploring these formations for weeks, half to escape the noise of town, half to chase the ghost of his father. The older men at the livery said the ridge was riddled with caves, some natural, others carved by men long dead. "Don't go poking where the earth don't want you," they warned. But Evan had never been good at listening. The mule balked near a cluster of boulders, nostrils flaring. The air here felt different, cooler, sharper. Between two rocks half hidden by sagebrush, Evan noticed a dark slit in the earth. Kneeling, he brushed away vines and dirt, revealing rough boards and rusted metal. Someone had tried to seal it once. A faint draft breathed out from within, smelling of rust and rain-soaked stone. He leaned closer. The wood was splintered but not ancient. It hadn't been sealed that long ago. A crow called from somewhere above, harsh and lonely. Evan's pulse quickened. He reached for the small lantern hanging from his belt, thumbed the flint, and lit it. The flame flickered weakly in the dry air. "Just a look," he muttered, as if speaking aloud could steady him. He'd said those same words every time he'd gone exploring, but this time they sounded more like a promise. The first board cracked under his boot. The second gave way entirely, collapsing inward with a hollow groan. He crouched and shone the lantern through the gap. The darkness beyond was thick, almost solid, swallowing the light before it could stretch far. "Guess we're doing this," he whispered. His voice sounded strange, swallowed by the wind. Taking a breath, he ducked inside. The cave's mouth was just wide enough for his shoulders. Inside, the air turned cold and damp, carrying a faint metallic tang that stung his throat. Water dripped somewhere deeper in. The ground sloped downward, loose gravel crunching under his boots. Shadows danced on the jagged walls, which glimmered faintly under the lantern's glow. "Dad." The word escaped him before he meant it to soft and foolish, as if the darkness might answer. But only the drip-drip of unseen water replied. He walked further in. The walls narrowed, then opened suddenly into a small chamber. There, the lantern light caught something that didn't belong. Evan crouched. A piece of metal glinted between stones. He brushed away dirt with trembling fingers, revealing a brass badge. His breath hitched. The engraving was still clear despite the year's U.S. Deputy Marshal. Beneath it, a name, James Fletcher. The name meant nothing to him, but the badge did. It meant someone from the law had died here, or worse, had been left here. A chill climbed his spine. His lantern flickered as though a breath had passed over the flame. He thought of his father, of how the men in town never looked him in the eye when they spoke of that ridge. What else lay under this earth? He picked up the badge, wiping grime from the metal. Beneath it, half buried in loose stone, was something pale. At first he thought it was a shard of quartz, but when he brushed more dirt away, his stomach lurched. It was bone. A skull yellowed and cracked with a small, perfect hole through the back. "God," he whispered, stumbling backward. His lantern shook violently, shadows jumping across the cave like living things. He stared at the skull again, that round, deliberate hole. A gunshot, execution style. Someone had been murdered here and hidden away like a secret. For a moment, the air itself seemed to tighten, pressing against him heavy, with a story that didn't want to be told. The badge gleamed faintly, as if daring him to carry it. He slipped it into his pocket without thinking. Then the lantern flickered again, not from his trembling, but from a draft. The faint breeze came from deeper inside the cave. He turned toward the darkness, heart hammering. There was more back there. More secrets. More bones, maybe more answers. But before he could move, a sound echoed faintly from the tunnel behind him. The crunch of gravel under someone else's boots. He froze, the hair on his arms rising. He wasn't alone down here. The air in the cave grew colder the farther Evan went, as if each step pulled him deeper into the lungs of the earth. The walls pressed close on both sides, wet with condensation that caught his lantern light in dull glimmers. His own breath echoed back at him, slow and shallow. Every sound seemed doubled the crunch of his boots, the faint clink of the lantern hook, even the quick thud of his heartbeat. It was the kind of silence that listened. He told himself the footsteps he'd heard before were just echoes. Maybe the sound of rocks settling, maybe nerves. He wasn't sure he believed it, but it was easier to move if he pretended he did. The passage bent left and narrowed so tight that his shoulders scraped the walls. The smell of metal and damp stone grew stronger. He lifted the lantern higher, squinting at faint markings scratched into the rock lines that curved and crossed like someone had tried to carve letters, but gave up halfway. His father's stories about old prospectors came back to him. Then men who swore they'd seen markings from ancient tribes or warnings scrawled by miners before a collapse. Evan traced one of the grooves with his fingers. It wasn't natural. The edges were sharp, purposeful. Someone had been down here cutting these into the stone. But why? He pressed forward, stooping beneath a low arch where the ceiling sagged. Water dripped steadily, pattering into small puddles. His lantern cast reflections that shimmered like spilled mercury. He almost missed it, the thing that caught light in the corner. A faint glint of metal beneath a pile of fallen rock. He hesitated, heart quickening again. Part of him wanted to turn back to leave the darkness to itself. But curiosity had a weight of its own, pulling him forward. He knelt, setting the lantern beside him. The rocks were cold, rough against his palms. He began moving them one by one. The scraping echoed softly. A faint gust whispered past, stirring the flame. His fingers brushed something smooth and hard beneath the debris. He pushed away more stones, uncovering a curve of pale ivory. It wasn't quartz. It wasn't wood. His breath stopped. The surface was too even, too round. Carefully, he brushed away more dirt until the shape took form. A skull. The hollows of the eyes caught the lantern light, staring at him with that silent, eternal accusation. For a long moment, Evan couldn't move. Then he saw it, the hole. A clean, round puncture through the back of the bone, no larger than a coin. Not the work of time or collapse, but of a bullet. The realization hit like a blow to the chest. Whoever this had been hadn't died in an accident. They had been executed. His stomach turned. He forced himself to look away, focusing instead on the patch of soil beside the skull. There, half buried, lay something glinting faintly beneath dust and gravel. He brushed it clean with shaking fingers. A badge, silver heavy, still bright, despite years underground. The engraving read, U.S. Deputy Marshal. Beneath it, the name James Fletcher. He whispered it aloud, the sound strange and hollow in the chamber. The name echoed once, twice, before fading into the stone. A lawman buried under a pile of rocks like garbage. His thumb traced the edge of the badge. The cold metal felt alive somehow, humming faintly in his palm. He imagined the man who had worn it riding across plains, the star on his chest catching sunlight. What had brought him here? Why had no one come for him? Evan slipped the badge into his pocket before he could second-guess the impulse. The small act felt dangerous, almost sacred, like disturbing a grave. He rose slowly, wiping his dirty hands against his pants. The lantern light wavered, reflected in something dark and glossy near the skull. He leaned closer. A small puddle shimmered on the stone floor. For an instant he thought it was water, but it was too thick, too red in the lamplight. Dried blood turned to rust, but not ancient. Not years old, months maybe less. His throat tightened. The cave had claimed someone else recently, or someone had been here to check on their secret. He looked deeper into the tunnel where the air seemed to move, carrying that faint, metallic scent, stronger now, almost sharp enough to taste. He listened. At first, nothing. Then a sound, soft, distant, but real. The echo of a boot scuffing stone, not his own. He turned lantern shaking, trying to tell where it came from. The flames sputtered, as if something unseen had breathed too close. The shadows shifted along the wall, stretching, merging, almost forming shapes. Evan's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He gripped the lantern handle tighter, backing slowly toward the passage he'd come from. Behind him, gravel crunched again, closer this time. He drew in a breath, every muscle tense, and waited for the next sound. It came clear as daylight, the low murmur of a man's voice, calm and certain, echoing from somewhere behind the bend. Evan's first instinct was to run, but his legs refused to move. The voice that echoed through the cave was too close, too human, carrying the heavy certainty of men who belonged here. "Someone's been down here." One of them said, his tone low, but unmistakably sharp. "Fresh tracks." The words rolled down the tunnel like cold water. Evan's pulse roared in his ears. He dropped to his knees, and with a trembling hand turned the lantern wick down until the flame died. Darkness closed over him, absolute and suffocating. The smell of oil and damp rock thickened around his face. He crouched behind a pile of fallen stones, pressing his shoulder against the cold wall. The air quivered faintly with the echo of boots scuffing gravel. Two sets of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached from the deeper shaft. "We told him this place was sealed," another voice murmured, older, rougher. "Nobody should have found it." There was the faint clink of metal, perhaps a lantern swinging, perhaps a gun. Evan could almost feel the heat of the light, even though it hadn't yet reached him. He prayed the small flicker from his extinguished lamp hadn't betrayed him before it went out. The men's words carried that measured confidence of people who had done dark things and lived to tell about them. A faint halo of light appeared around the bend. Evan pressed himself flatter to the ground, dust clinging to his hair, and sweat tracing the side of his face. He recognized that deeper voice, now steady and commanding, the one giving orders. It belonged to Sheriff Rowan, his father's old friend, the man who had held his shoulder at the funeral and promised to look after the family. Hearing him down here twisted something deep in Evan's chest. The sheriff's lantern beam swept across the walls, pausing on the marks carved into the stone. "Someone's been digging," Rowan said. "This wasn't like this before." The other man responded, voice low, composed, every word clipped like a blade. "If they've seen anything, we have a problem. A big one." That second voice carried a weight that made even Rowan sound smaller. Evan's blood ran cold. He knew that voice too, though he had never spoken to its owner directly. Mr. Barrett Carter, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties, patron of half the town. The kind of man whose name carried both respect and fear. Carter was power in human form, polite in daylight, untouchable after dark. His voice filled the chamber now, smooth as oil, yet hard beneath the surface. "If anyone knows what's in here," he said, "we're all finished." The scrape of boots drew closer. Their lanterns threw long, shifting shadows along the tunnel, slicing through the dark like knives. Evan could see them now, faint silhouettes against the glow. Rowan's hat brim dipped as he studied the ground. "There," he said, softly pointing. "Boot prints. Smaller. Could be a kid." Evan swallowed hard, feeling the blood thrum in his temples. He pressed his body tighter against the rock, barely daring to breathe. Carter stepped forward, the light catching the side of his face, sharp cheekbones, trimmed beard. Expression calm, as if he were examining a business deal rather than a grave. "How recent?" "A few hours at most," Rowan answered. "Could have been curious, maybe one of the boys from town." "Then find him," Carter replied evenly, "and make sure he doesn't come back." The words were quiet, but the tone left no room for misunderstanding. There was no panic in his voice, only the careful efficiency of a man accustomed to erasing problems. Evan's fingers dug into the dirt. His father's old stories about men who disappeared without explanation flashed through his mind, the prospector who knew too much, the drifter who asked the wrong question. Was this how it had happened? The light swung closer. Rowan knelt to inspect the badge Evan had dropped before. "Marshal's badge," he muttered. "Thought we buried all this." Carter's reply was almost gentle. "You buried the man, Sheriff. You never bury what he was after." A pause stretched between them, heavy as the air in the cave. Then Rowan asked, "What about the rest? You said you moved everything." Carter's tone hardened. "I moved what mattered. The rest stays. Let sleeping ghosts lie, Rowan." Evan's heart pounded so loud he feared they could hear it. Dust prickled his throat. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep still. The lanterns turned toward the chamber entrance. "Come on," Carter said. "Let's check the back passage. If he came through, he might still be here." The footsteps began to move again, closer this time. The glow of light crept over the rocks ahead of Evan's hiding place. For a brief instant, it illuminated the skull he had uncovered, the hollow eyes gleaming like glass. Rowan stopped. "Look at that," he murmured. "We should have sealed it better." Carter's shadow shifted, and his voice came low and final. "If anyone finds the body, Rowan, we're both finished." Evan's pulse thundered. He could smell the oil from their lamps, now feel the vibration of their steps through the stone. The sheriff's boots scraped inches away from where he crouched. He closed his eyes, praying the silence would hold. But then from somewhere behind him, in the tunnel, a pebble dislodged and rolled down the slope, tapping against the rock with a sharp, betraying sound. Evan didn't stop running until the cave was far behind him, and the hills of Willow Creek opened up to the faint orange light of evening. His chest burned, lungs scraping for air, as if the cold had followed him out of the earth. The sky was bruised purple and gold, the last streaks of sun sinking behind the ridgeline. Every sound made him flinch: the wind through the grass, the caw of a crow, the echo of boots that weren't really there. He clutched the deputy's badge in his fist so tightly that the metal cut into his palm. He needed to think, to breathe, to find someone who could make sense of what he had just seen. There was only one person in town he trusted enough for that. The road down to Main Street wound through the cottonwoods past the river, where children used to fish before the mines poisoned it. When he reached the edge of town, lanterns were already glowing in windows. He kept to the shadows, not wanting to draw the sheriff's attention if Rowan was still awake. The boarding house stood at the end of the street, 2 stories high, with a sagging porch and a hand-painted sign that read Lane House, Lodging and Meals. The curtains glowed softly from lamplight within. Evan hesitated before knocking. His hand trembled slightly as he rapped on the door. It opened almost at once. Mrs. Claire Lane stood in the doorway, her gray hair pinned up loosely, her face lined but kind. "Evan Reed," she said, frowning in surprise. "What on earth are you doing here this late? You look like you've seen something dreadful." Evan swallowed hard, stepping inside as she ushered him toward the small parlor. The room smelled faintly of coffee and lavender soap. "There's something you need to see," he said, voice raw. He placed the silver badge on her kitchen table, the metal gleaming under the lamplight. Claire's eyes fixed on it, and the color drained from her face. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then her hand rose slowly to her mouth, trembling. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "In a cave out past the ridge," Evan said. "I didn't know what it was at first. Then I found bones." Her knees seemed to weaken, and she reached for a chair, lowering herself slowly. "James," she murmured, the name escaping like a breath she'd been holding for years. "James Fletcher. My brother." Evan blinked, stunned. "He was your brother." Claire nodded, eyes glistening. "He came to Willow Creek almost a year ago. Said he was working on something important, a federal investigation into the sale of government land. He wrote me once from Lead Junction. That was the last I heard from him." She reached for the badge with both hands, cradling it, as if it were something alive. "I told him not to go near Barrett Carter," she said softly. "Told him that man doesn't just buy land, he buys silence." Evan's stomach twisted. "Carter," he said. "He was there. in the cave, with Sheriff Rowan. I heard them talking about the body. Claire looked up sharply, her expression turning from grief to quiet fury. Then it's true, she whispered. They killed him. She stood and crossed the room to a cabinet against the wall. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its corners cracked with age. She placed it in front of Evan. James left this here before he disappeared, she said. Said if anything happened to him, someone in town would know the truth. I never opened it. Couldn't bring myself to. Evan hesitated before touching it. The leather was warm from her hands. He untied the thin string and opened the first page. Inside were maps of the county, marked with X's along the ridge and by the river. There were lists of property deeds all signed over to companies that didn't exist. Notes in neat handwriting read, Carter Holdings Rowan Security falsified documents, bribes paid to the mayor's office. Evan's pulse quickened as he flipped through page after page, each more damning than the last. He was going to expose them, he said quietly. He had proof. And they found out. Claire replied, her voice hollow. She sank back into her chair, staring at the lamplight. James thought justice was something you could simply hand to people, and they'd know what to do with it. He didn't understand that here justice is a business too. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the silence between them. Outside, a horse trotted past on the street hooves, echoing faintly. Evan closed the notebook and looked at her. If they know I found this, he said, they'll come for me too. Claire nodded. They will, she said simply. But maybe that's why you're the one who had to find him. You don't owe them anything. She reached out, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Listen to me. There's more hidden than you think. James left a copy of his files somewhere safe, just in case. The key to it is in here. She tapped the notebook's inside cover where a small brass key was sewn under the lining. He said it would open a box in the church cellar. St. Matthew's. Evan nodded slowly, his mind spinning. Claire's eyes softened, then the anger fading to something more fragile. You remind me of him, she said. Too young to be this tired. Evan looked down at the badge gleaming between them and felt the weight of it settle deep in his chest. I'll find what he left, he said quietly. I'll finish what he started. The words felt heavy, like a promise that might cost more than he could pay. A gust of wind rattled the window, making the flame flicker. Claire rose to close it, but paused, glancing toward the street where faint hoofbeats echoed again, slow measured and far too close. The sound of hoofbeats lingered in Evan's mind long after they faded from the street outside. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did Mrs. Lane. They kept the lamps low and the curtains drawn, speaking in whispers as if the walls themselves might be listening. The little brass key now hung on a cord around Evan's neck, its weight a constant reminder of what they had uncovered. Tomorrow, Claire said quietly, we'll go to the church. The cellar's locked most days, but Father Jonas owes me a favor. We'll find what James hid. Evan nodded, though his stomach felt tight with unease. When dawn broke pale and cold, he left through the back alley, taking the long route home to avoid the sheriff's office. The streets were quiet, washed in gray morning light. He tried to tell himself they were safe for now that Carter's men wouldn't act so boldly in daylight. But deep down he knew that men like Carter didn't fear the sun. By afternoon, the town carried a strange stillness, as if waiting for something to happen. Even the air smelled dry and brittle. Evan stayed out near the creek until dusk, not wanting to lead trouble to Claire's door. When he finally made his way back up the hill, he saw the smoke before he saw the flames. A dark column rose above the rooftops, glowing orange at its base. His heart lurched. He ran. The boarding house was a furnace. The wooden porch engulfed, windows shattered from the heat. Townsfolk had gathered, passing buckets in a hopeless chain. Someone shouted that an oil lamp had fallen, that it was an accident, but Evan's gaze followed the trail of hoofprints in the mud, deep, distinct, leading down from the ridge road toward Carter's land. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring their shouts. The fire roared like an animal, spitting sparks into the night. She's still inside, someone yelled. Without thinking, Evan covered his face with his sleeve and forced his way through the doorway, choking on smoke. The parlor was gone, swallowed by flame, but near the back hall he found her. Claire collapsed near the stairs, her dress scorched face gray beneath the soot. He pulled her free, coughing, dragging her out into the cold grass where the night air stung his lungs. She opened her eyes weakly, her voice a whisper of breath. "Evan, they came back." He held her hand, trembling. "Who did this?" She tried to speak, coughed instead, the sound wet and shallow. "They killed James. Now me. But listen." She fumbled at the chain around her neck and pulled free a small iron key, darker than the brass one, heavy and cold. Its head was etched with 2 letters, SM. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "St. Matthew," she breathed. "He hid the rest there. Promise me you'll finish it." Tears burned behind his eyes. "I promise," he said through his voice barely carried. "Just hold on. We'll get the doctor." But she shook her head, a faint smile flickering across her lips. No doctor can change what's been done. Justice still lives, Evan. It just needs hands brave enough to carry it. Her hand went slack in his, and the sound of the fire seemed to fade into silence. For a moment, the whole world stilled. The glow of the flames lit her face like a final sunrise, soft and fleeting. Evan knelt there until the bucket line reached them, until someone pulled him back, and the weight of her body was lifted away. He didn't remember how he got home. The town blurred into smoke and shadow. By the time he reached his cabin on the edge of the woods, the moon was high and pale. He pushed open the door, expecting darkness, but the lamp on his table was still burning. He froze. He hadn't left it that way. The air inside felt wrong, disturbed. He stepped in slowly, every creak of the floorboards loud in the stillness. The room smelled faintly of tobacco, though he didn't smoke. His bed was unmade, his drawers half open. They had been here. His gaze fell to the mantel. The photograph of his father, the one thing he'd kept from before the mine collapsed, was gone. Only a clean rectangle of dust remained where it had stood. His throat tightened. Someone had wanted him to know they'd been there. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was a message. He looked down at the iron key still clenched in his fist, its edges biting into his skin. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint crackle of distant fire. Evan crossed to the window and stared out at the hills. In the distance, a single lantern bobbed along the ridge road, moving steadily toward Carter's ranch. The next morning came gray and bitterly still, as though the world itself held its breath after the fire. Evan left town before dawn, keeping to the creek bed, where the frost muted his steps. Smoke still hung faintly over Willow Creek, and behind him, the remains of the boarding house were nothing more than blackened beams against the pale sky. He carried the iron key on a leather string around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, its cold weight like a heartbeat against his chest. The road to St. Matthew's climbed the hill overlooking the valley. The church stood alone among bare oaks, its steeple black with age. The bell had been silent since the previous pastor died 2 winters ago, the rope long snapped in a storm. Evan slipped inside through the side door. The nave smelled of wax and dust. A few candles still burned near the altar, their flames flickering weakly in the draft that came from the cracked, stained glass window. He waited until the silence felt safe, then moved toward the back where the cellar stairs led down beneath the sanctuary. The iron key turned stiffly in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stone staircase that wound into the dark. He took the lantern from its hook and descended. The air below was cold and dry, thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten prayers. Shelves lined the walls stacked with hymnals, crates of communion cups, and boxes wrapped in cloth. He searched slowly, running his fingers along the dust-caked edges until something metallic scraped against his hand. In the far corner, half hidden under a tarp, sat a small iron chest, with initials etched into the lid JF. The padlock bore the mark SM. His pulse quickened. The key fit perfectly, the lock gave a tired click and fell open. Inside, beneath a layer of folded papers, lay a wax cylinder, one of the old recording rolls used decades ago, the kind his father once played on a hand-cranked phonograph. A label was tied around it with string Carter Rowan Confession. Evan's hands trembled as he lifted it from the box. He set it carefully onto the church's phonograph, an antique, kept near the stairs for choir practice recordings. The parish had used it for years to record hymns and sermons on old cylinders. The machine groaned when he turned the crank, its gears squealing before settling into a steady spin. The needle dropped. For a few seconds, there was only the hiss of static. Then a voice, rough and unmistakably human, filled the cellar. "We took care of Fletcher," it said. "1 bullet back of the head. Same place as before, cave number 4. Another voice, lower calm, almost polite, replied, "Good. Barrett said to bury the body with the documents. No one will go looking there." Evan felt the blood drain from his face. The first voice belonged to Sheriff Rowan. The second was Carter's. The recording crackled and ended abruptly with the scrape of a chair and the sound of a door closing. The silence that followed was so heavy, it seemed to push against his chest. He stood there frozen, every breath shallow, every heartbeat loud. Then a voice spoke softly from behind him. "What did you find, my son?" Startled. He turned. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was Father Jonas, his white collar bright in the dim light. Evan opened his mouth but couldn't form words. The priest approached slowly, eyes fixed on the phonograph, still spinning. "That sound," he murmured. "I know those voices." Evan nodded faintly, his throat dry. "They killed a federal marshal," he said. "They burned the evidence. This proves it." The priest's face went pale. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he sighed deeply, closing his eyes. "You must destroy it," he said, "now, before anyone else hears." Evan blinked in disbelief. "Destroy it! This is proof, it's the truth!" Father Jonas shook his head, stepping closer, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. We all owe Carter something. The roof above this church, the land it stands on, the debts that keep the bank from taking our homes. You bring this out, you destroy everyone with it." The weight of those words pressed heavy between them. Evan looked at the recording, the cylinder dull and harmless in the lantern's glow, yet filled with the voices of murderers. "Then justice means nothing here?" he asked quietly. The priest didn't answer. He only whispered again, "Burn it, son, please." A movement caught Evan's eye near the top of the stairs, just a flicker of shadow before it disappeared. He glanced upward, but Father Jonas didn't notice. Somewhere above a door creaked shut. Evan hesitated, then pocketed the wax cylinder, ignoring the priest's outstretched hand. "I can't," he said. "This belongs to the law." He turned toward the stairs, the key clinking softly against his chest. Father Jonas called after him, voice low and broken. "If you do this, they'll kill you too." Evan didn't look back. He pushed open the cellar door and stepped into the weak daylight. The church was empty, but a small figure slipped quietly from the side pew where she had been hiding behind the curtain. It was Eliza Lane, her face pale and determined beneath her bonnet. She watched Evan disappear down the path toward the woods, then looked back at the cellar door, her jaw set. She had heard every word. She knew what that recording meant, and she knew exactly what she had to do. By nightfall, the wind had turned sharp enough to cut through bone. Snow came in long, drifting sheets, muffling the sound of everything except the wind moaning through the silent bell tower. Evan waited in the shadows behind the blacksmith's shop, the wax cylinder tucked inside the metal box beneath his coat. His arm still ached from smoke and exhaustion, but his mind was fixed on the road ahead. He was leaving Willow Creek tonight, one way or another. A faint crunch of boots on snow made him turn. It was Eliza Lane, wrapped in her mother's heavy coat, her hair hidden under a wool hood. She led 2 horses, both saddled, breath steaming in the frozen air. "They'll come for you before dawn," she whispered. Father Jonas told the sheriff about the recording. Evan stared at her in disbelief. "He wouldn't." "He already did," she said firmly. "I saw Rowan ride out with Carter's men. They're searching every road." She pressed a revolver into his hand, small and well-kept. "Mother's. You'll need it." He hesitated, but she met his eyes with a quiet strength that left no room for argument. "We ride north," she said. Through the pass. If we reach the river by morning, they'll lose the trail." Evan nodded once. The horses moved nervously, sensing the storm. They rode out through the alley, snow crunching beneath hooves, their breaths hanging like ghosts in the wind. The town lights faded behind them until there was nothing but white fields and the dark line of trees. For a time, they rode in silence, the only sound the creak of saddles and the hiss of snow against leather. Evan's thoughts churned about Claire, about the fire, about the photograph stolen from his home. He wondered if his father had once followed the same trail, searching for truth and finding only darkness. "You didn't have to come," he said softly. Eliza glanced at him. "I couldn't let her die for nothing." Her words were simple, steady, the kind that stayed with a person. They crossed the first ridge as the storm thickened snow, swallowing the trail behind them. Evan's fingers were numb around the reins. He glanced over his shoulder. Far off against the pale horizon, flickers of light moved like fireflies' lanterns. "They found us," he said. The wind carried the faint rhythm of hoofbeats growing clearer, faster. "Keep riding," Eliza urged. They urged the horses forward, weaving through the trees. Branches whipped at their coats, snow spraying in every direction. A gunshot cracked the night. The sound echoed through the valley. Evan felt a sudden, searing pain tear across his shoulder. He cried out, slipping sideways, the world spinning white and red. He hit the ground, hard snow exploding beneath him. The metal box slid from his coat, clattering against a rock. Eliza pulled her horse around, shouting his name. He tried to push himself up, his left arm slick with blood, his breath shallow and ragged. "Go," he rasped. "Take it and go." But she dismounted instead, grabbing the box and dragging him toward a fallen log for cover. Another shot split the air, sending bark flying inches from her head. The riders were close now, 3 of them, their torches blazing through the storm. One voice called out, deep and commanding. Evan recognized it even through the wind. Sheriff Rowan. Eliza cocked the revolver, firing twice into the dark. The flashes lit the trees like lightning. A horse screamed, stumbled, and went down. "We can't stay here," she shouted. Evan's vision blurred, but he forced himself to his feet. They ran half-sliding through the snow, the metal box clutched to his chest. The forest opened suddenly onto a frozen creek. Their horses were gone, lost to the trees. Behind them, voices grew louder. Then out of the storm ahead, a lantern appeared, steady, deliberate. A man stepped into view, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a deputy's coat faded with age. Down he barked. A single shot rang out from his rifle, followed by a cry from the ridge. One of the riders fell. "This way," he called, waving them toward a cluster of rocks. Eliza hesitated only a second before pulling Evan along. They collapsed behind the stones, snow piling around them. The man crouched beside them, reloading. "Name's Thomas Hale," he said quickly. "Used to ride for Rowan before he tossed me out. Guess now I know why." Evan stared at him, dazed. "You know about enough to pick a side." Thomas interrupted. "You've got something they want. Keep it close." Another volley of gunfire cracked through the trees. Thomas stood to return fire, shouting for them to move toward the creek. He covered them, each shot echoing sharp and sure. They scrambled down the embankment, half running, half falling, the storm swallowing the world in white. Evan turned just in time to see Thomas take a bullet to the chest. The deputy stumbled, dropped to one knee, then fired once more before collapsing into the snow. Eliza screamed his name, but the wind carried it away. Evan tried to go back, but she pulled him forward, tears freezing on her cheeks. Behind them, the last echoes of gunfire faded. The dawn was breaking faintly through the storm, painting the sky with pale light. They kept moving, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots until the ridge hid the place where Thomas had fallen. By the time the snow stopped, Evan and Eliza had been riding for nearly 2 days. The forest thinned into open prairie, where the wind no longer carried the smell of pine, but of cold dust and iron. Lead Junction lay ahead, a mining town turned administrative seat. Its courthouse, a square building of brick and stone that looked older than justice itself. Evan's shoulder still burned from the bullet wound, but he refused to slow down. They rode straight to the courthouse steps, the metal box strapped to the saddle. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of paper and ink. A clerk sat behind a high desk, glasses perched on his nose, his pen scratching lazily over ledgers. When Evan placed the box in front of him, the man looked up unimpressed. "What's this?" he asked. Evan lifted the lid and showed him the wax cylinder. "Evidence," he said. "A recording. Voices of Sheriff Rowan and Barrett Carter admitting to murder." The clerk blinked once, then leaned back, folding his hands. "Voices," he repeated. "Do you have a warrant? A certified transcript, any official seal?" "It's their voices," Evan insisted. "You can hear them." The clerk sighed, the kind of sigh used for children. "Son, the court doesn't try ghosts. Bring a signed confession, a statement under oath, something the judge can stamp." Eliza stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. "You don't understand. People have died for this. My mother, a federal marshal. Miss," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "I understand you're upset, but this isn't how the law works. We can't prosecute men like Carter without procedure." Evan's voice hardened. "Men like Carter are the reason procedure doesn't work." The clerk's smile faltered, but only for a second. He reached for the box as if to close it. "Leave it with me. I'll file it under miscellaneous until someone reviews it." Evan snatched it back. "You won't," he said quietly. "You'll burn it just like they burned the house." The room went still. The clerk's expression tightened, and he looked toward the window. "You'd better go," he said, "and take your stories with you before the sheriff gets wind of them." The name struck like a hammer. Sheriff Rowan. Evan turned to Eliza, understanding dawning too late. The clerk stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Guards," he shouted. Evan grabbed the box and bolted for the door. They ran into the street, snow crunching under their boots, its shouts echoing behind them. A wanted poster flapped against the courthouse wall, edges still wet from fresh glue. The sketch was crude, but unmistakable. Evan's face, his name written beneath in heavy black ink. Wanted for theft and murder. $1,000 reward. His stomach dropped. "They got here before us," he whispered. Rowan had beaten them to the law. Every eye on the street seemed to turn their way. Men in heavy coats reached for weapons. Someone yelled for the sheriff. Eliza grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the alley. "This way." They weaved between wagons past the rail yard and down to the stables. The horses they'd ridden were gone, confiscated, no doubt. They ducked into an empty stall, hearts pounding. Evan pressed his back to the wall, the box clutched against his chest. "We can't stay here," Eliza said, her breath clouding in the cold air. "We'll take the train east. There's a circuit judge in Rapid City who'll listen." But even as she spoke, boots thundered outside. Voices shouted orders. The sound of cocked rifles echoed in the narrow corridor. Evan looked at her, panic rising. "Go," he said. "They'll catch us both." "I'm not leaving you," she answered. He didn't have time to argue. The stall door burst open, light flooding in. Hands grabbed them, pulling them apart. One of Rowan's men smashed the wax cylinder against the stones. Eliza palmed 2 cracked rings and slipped them into her sleeve. Evan struggled, shouting her name as she was dragged away. A rifle butt struck his ribs, knocking the breath from him. The last thing he saw before being thrown into the mud was Eliza's face, defiant, terrified, as they hauled her toward the sheriff's wagon. That night they locked her in the small jailhouse behind the courthouse. The snow fell again, soft and relentless. Eliza sat on the cold bench, her wrists chafed by iron cuffs. The room smelled of damp stone and kerosene. The door creaked open, and Barrett Carter stepped inside. His coat was immaculate, his expression calm. He removed his gloves carefully as though entering a business meeting. "Miss Lane," he said in that even voice she had heard once before, "you've made quite a mess." She didn't answer. He walked closer, stopping just outside her reach. "You know," he continued, "truth is a beautiful thing, but it's also useless without power. Truth doesn't keep the cold out. It doesn't feed a soul." His eyes softened slightly, but the smile that followed carried no warmth. "Justice is a fine story for sermons, but it won't save you. It saved your victims." She said, her voice steady, though her hands shook. "It will again." Carter's smile widened. "You're young. You still think the world rewards bravery. It doesn't. It rewards silence. He tapped the bars lightly as though testing their strength. The boy will be dead by morning. You, however, might live if you remember how to be quiet. Eliza met his guys without flinching. My mother died for this. I won't be quiet. Carter sighed, almost sadly, and turned toward the door. Then you'll learn what her silence cost her, he said. The door closed behind him with a soft metallic click, leaving the cell steeped in cold and shadow. Outside, a whistle blew the midnight train departing Lead Junction. 6 winters passed like the slow breathing of the mountains. The world beyond Willow Creek changed, but in the hills where snow never fully melted, time seemed to hold its ground. The mines closed the tracks, rusted, and the town's name faded from maps. Yet one man still ruled it from afar. Barrett Carter, wealthier than ever, his influence stretching from ranch to courthouse. His men patrolled the roads and his name hung over every deal signed in 3 counties. No one spoke of the marshal who vanished or the girl who defied him. The story had become a whisper, told only by those who no longer feared anything. And there were few of those left. Far north in the shadow of pine-covered ridges, Evan Reed lived as if buried alive. His cabin was small, half hidden among the trees, its chimney breathing thin smoke into the cold air. He worked the forest for timber trading wood and hides with the few trappers who passed through. The scar on his shoulder still ached when the wind came from the south, a reminder of the night everything had burned. He spoke little and trusted no one. The metal box that once held the wax cylinder was buried beneath the hearth, empty now, but never forgotten. Sometimes when the snow fell hard against the roof, he dreamed of fire. Claire's voice calling his name, Eliza's face framed in torchlight, the sound of gunfire, swallowed by storm. He would wake in darkness and stare at the embers until dawn, wondering if justice had died with the people who believed in it. One evening in early March, when the thaw had just begun, someone knocked on his door. It was a soft sound, uncertain like a question. Evan hesitated before answering. No one came this far up the mountain unless they had reason. He opened the door slowly, his rifle resting against his arm. The sight before him stole his breath. Eliza Lane stood on the porch, thin as a ghost, her face pale and hollow, her voice roughened by years of cold air and harder living. She was wrapped in a worn coat too big for her frame, snow melting from her hair. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled faintly, a tired, fragile smile that made her look both older and somehow unchanged. "Hello, Evan," she said. His voice caught. "They said you were dead," she finished softly. "Almost." He stepped aside, letting her in. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke. She sank into the chair by the fire, hands trembling from the cold. Evan poured her tea from the kettle and waited. Finally, she reached into her coat and placed a thick envelope on the table between them. The paper was creased and smudged, but the red seal at the corner was unmistakable, a federal emblem embossed with the eagle of the Department of Justice. "They reopened it," she said quietly. Evan stared. "Reopened what the case?" she answered. "Your marshals murder my mother's fire all of it." She pushed the envelope toward him. "There's a copy of the cylinder inside. Specialists at the Department of Justice restored it from what was left of the wax. The voices are clear now. Rowan, Carter, the whole confession." He touched the seal as if it might vanish. How he whispered. "After they released me," she said, her gaze distant, "I went east. I found a man in Chicago who worked with phonographs, the kind used by the government. He said sound never truly dies. It just waits to be heard again. I sent what was left of the recording to him along with every note from my mother's journal. It took years, but he managed to recover the voices." She paused, her fingers tracing the steam rising from her cup. "I sent it to Washington 3 months ago. They verified it. The marshal's death is now an open investigation under federal review." The words felt unreal, echoing in the small room like a prayer half forgotten. Evan leaned back, his hands trembling. "You did all that alone?" She met his eyes. "Someone had to. They took everything from us, but not the truth. The fire popped softly, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, wind moved through the trees, whispering like distant voices. "They'll come for you again," he said quietly. "Carter still owns half the state." "Not for long," she replied. "He's under federal summons. The judge in Washington wants testimony. They're calling witnesses from the territory. They want you too." Evan shook his head, disbelief, mixing with fear. "They'll kill us before we get there." Maybe she said her voice low, but steady. "But at least they'll have to chase us through the light this time, not the dark." She reached into her coat again and pulled out a folded photograph, the one that had been stolen from his cabin years ago. It was weathered now, corners bent, but unmistakable. His father smiling faintly beside a mine shaft. "They kept this," she said, handing it to him. "I found it in Carter's office. Your father was working with Marshal Fletcher before he disappeared. He was trying to help." The air left Evan's lungs. For a moment, all he could do was stare at the photograph, the image blurring as the firelight flickered across it. His father hadn't vanished in a cave-in. He had been silenced just like Fletcher, just like Claire. Eliza's voice drew him back. "We leave tomorrow," she said. "There's a train out of Coldwater Junction. It'll take us to Washington by week's end. After that, there's no more running." Evan looked at her across the table, the envelope between them glowing faintly in the firelight. 6 years of silence had led to this single moment, the sound of truth waiting to be heard again. 2 winters turned to spring before the world remembered what had happened in the hills of Willow Creek. The trial in Washington stretched longer than anyone expected, tangled in politics and old debts. Yet in the end, truth moved like the slow thaw of snow, inevitable once the sun found it. Barrett Carter and Sheriff Rowan were convicted of corruption, conspiracy, and murder. Their names filled the newspapers from the Dakotas to Chicago. But Carter never heard the verdict. He died in his cell 3 weeks before sentencing pneumonia taking him in the night. Rowan lived to face the judgment, gray-haired and hollow-eyed, muttering that he had only done what the times demanded. The court stripped his badge, and the record of his crimes became public. The territory's papers called it a reckoning long delayed. Evan and Eliza sat in the courtroom when the ruling was read. She wore black, not for mourning, but for memory. He stood beside her, the scar on his shoulder hidden beneath his coat. When it was over, they didn't celebrate. There was no cheering, no satisfaction, only the quiet release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. 2 weeks later, they returned to South Dakota. The journey back felt heavier than the one that had taken them east. The train rattled past endless plains, past the small towns where Carter's shadow once stretched. Each mile carried them closer to the place where everything had begun. The ridge appeared first gray and jagged against the pale morning sky. The cave mouth was still there, though half collapsed now, the boards over its entrance weathered and split. Snow clung to the edges of the stones. The wind came cold from the north, carrying the faint scent of pine and frozen earth. Evan climbed the slope slowly, his boots crunching over frost until he stood at the edge looking down into the hollow. It felt smaller than he remembered, as if time itself had been working to bury it again. Behind him, Eliza Lane followed in silence, her steps light, careful. In her hands, she carried a small bundle wrapped in linen wildflowers, dried and brittle from the journey. She knelt beside a flat stone that marked the spot where Deputy Marshal James Fletcher had once lain. The inscription on the marker was simple: "Died in service to justice." She laid the flowers there, fingers brushing the cold surface. "He deserved better," she whispered. So did they all. Evan didn't answer at first. He was looking out across the valley where the faint outline of Willow Creek could still be seen through the morning haze. Smoke rose from a handful of chimneys, and the river glinted faintly in the weak light. "Do you ever think it was worth it?" she asked after a long silence. "Everything we lost." He turned to her, his face drawn but calm. "I think about it every day," he said. "Sometimes I wonder if the truth was worth all the pain." She looked down at the flowers, her breath visible in the cold air. "My mother used to say some truths don't bring peace," she murmured. "They just keep wounds open." The words hung between them, fragile as the frost clinging to the grass. Evan nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. Maybe, he said softly, but if no one's willing to dig them up, the world never changes. The wind lifted the edge of her scarf, carrying her mother's scent of lavender, for just an instant before it faded. Eliza smiled faintly, though her eyes shone. "You sound like her," she said. He gave a small, tired laugh. "She was braver than both of us. They stood there a long time, neither speaking the sound of the wind, their only company." The morning sun broke through the clouds at last, lighting the hills in soft gold. The light touched the cave's mouth, glinting off the frozen stones, as if the earth itself exhaled after years of holding its breath. Evan took the badge from his coat pocket, the same one he had found buried in the dust years before. The metal was tarnished now, but when the sunlight struck it, it gleamed faintly, just enough to remind him of the man who had worn it. He placed it beside the flowers on the stone. "You kept your promise," Eliza said quietly. "No," he replied, his voice gentle. "We kept it." She looked at him, the corner of her mouth trembling into a smile that carried both sorrow and pride. Below them, the valley stretched wide and empty, the land free again from the grip of the men who once claimed to own it. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt honest. Evan watched the wind scatter snow across the marker, covering the badge and the flowers until only the shape of the stone remained. The sun climbed higher, and the cold began to soften. Behind him, Eliza turned toward the path leading down the hill. "Ready?" she asked. He looked one last time at the cave, its shadow receding under the light, then nodded. They walked together toward the valley, leaving behind the place that had buried the past. As they descended, the sound of the creek reached them, a soft trickle of water beneath the thawing ice, steady and unbroken. Somewhere in that sound was the echo of everything they had fought for, the lives lost, the truths unearthed, and the quiet, imperfect peace that follows when justice finally wakes from its long sleep. Did this story move you? Tell us what you felt, what moment stayed with you most, and where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this about truth, courage, and the cost of doing what's right.